$240 chain lube. Let's get into it. Yes, it is Graphenlube from AbsoluteBlack, a hydrocarbon-based water emulsion containing a special mix of high-purity graphene. And the AbsoluteBlack website is absolutely stuffed with information about it, so I will just give you the spark notes. It allegedly gives you low drivetrain friction for a very long time between applications. So in theory, it saves you watts and it saves you money because you wear out your drivetrain slower. And really, that's about it for me. Before we dive in too deeply, I do want to set some parameters around what this video is. It is a setup, an install, and a sort of first impressions guide on what this lubricant is and how it all works. I don't intend to pass judgment on sort of efficiency gains or on drivetrain longevity. There is one person who I trust to test those things properly. His name is Adam Karen. He runs Zero Friction Cycling and he's also based in Adelaide. He has the consistent parameters, he uses controlled testing, and is fiercely committed to independence. That is where people should go to learn about drivetrain efficiency and sort of everything to do with drivetrain friction. He is a world expert on this stuff. I've linked to his website in the description below. To me, drivetrain friction is like aerodynamics. Obviously, I believe it exists and that it is a good thing, but I'm not equipped to measure it and I can't really scrutinize it. So I'm gonna stay away from a lot of those sort of manufacturer claims. What I'm interested in is what the lubricant is like to live with. How easy is it to put on your bike? How easy is it to sort of manage in an ongoing way? So when I was asked by the distributor of AbsoluteBlack if I wanted to test them, I said yes, but specifically I want to test them in a gravel biking sort of scenario because I am so sick of having to clean my gravel bikes. Every time I seem to take them for a ride, I have to come home and clean down the drivetrain, especially because it's been winter and the bikes are just grotty all the time. The claims then that I'm most interested in are dirt and water repellents and general low maintenance with only sort of occasional application. If it saves me time in having to work on and sort of clean my bikes, fantastic. And I'll wait for Adam's testing to confirm whether it does in fact make drivetrains last longer. So with that in mind, let's look at the setup. Now the first thing we need to do is actually get the chains nice and clean. Now in the interest of scientific vigor, I'm gonna start with a completely fresh set of chains. So let's get it clean. Okay, 2 banger fresh new chains. And basically what we are doing here is soaking off all of the factory greases that come with every sort of fresh chain. Now, you chuck it in the bag that AbsoluteBlack sends you and you cover it in some sort of white spirit, cleaning spirit sort of thing, and you leave it. They do say to leave it for a minimum of a couple of hours. The longer is better with all of these sort of processes. So I guess, I don't know, find something to do for the next few hours. Welcome back to Tabletown. A couple of updates. These spent about 2.5 moanas, or 4 hours soaking in the bag. Now what was interesting was I pulled this SRAM chain out and it was sort of nicely clean and you know, it only has the slightest sort of hint of grease on it, which is, you know, good, that's what you want. But the Shimano chain, it was a little bit greasy when I pulled it out. So I put it back in for another 2 moanas to give it a second soaking, but you can still feel it is just a little bit sticky. I think that Shimano grease is just much more resilient. Once these came out of the bag, they both spent the night drying, so they are absolutely clean and absolutely dry, except for the Shimano grease, which I don't think is gonna go anywhere. So something to keep an eye on. Now the next stage is actually getting the AbsoluteBlack lube onto the chains. So this is a pretty simple process. Give it a vigorous shake. I don't ride bikes to have to do upper body tasks. Okay, and we take the second bag that AbsoluteBlack have sent. Chains in. Now I'm going to do this just one chain at a time because you do need to immerse them fully, and I think that'll be easier just with an individual one. The instruction from AbsoluteBlack is to not use the whole bottle in one go. You just need enough to immerse the chain and get it fully within all the links. Best practice is to leave this for a couple of minutes just to make sure it soaks in nicely.
What is it, ma'am?
Like a squeaker, it won't come down.
A few minutes later and it looks gross in there, which I'm guessing is good. Now the next stage is to get it out and allow the excess to drip off and then hang it up to dry, which is, I've just realized I'm inside at my kitchen table. So that is something that I'm gonna have to do outside. I'll be back, give me a minute. So I've spared you the doubling up footage of the Shimano chain, but I do have a couple of reflections. It's a bit messy, just sort of handling this stuff. And, you know, the idea is that I do save the remnants of this bag because legit like $100 worth of lube. So, and that also becomes what you use in an ongoing way to re-lube the chain. So, yeah, I'm gonna have to find a way to catch all this stuff now. Okay, so I've basically recovered as much of it as I think is feasibly possible, and it's not as bad as I was expecting, minus what's in the bag, what's on the two chains, and what's in the little drippy bowl. It's actually about that full still, so right up to about the Absolute Black logo. And that's actually pretty good. That's way better than I was expecting. Once you've left it all to dry overnight, this is what you're left with. A chain that's a little bit tacky and a little bit sticky to touch, and it even looks a little bit dirty because that is what the sort of graphene leaves behind. The next part of the process is where things get a little bit hazy, because the Absolute Black instruction is this.
So once you're done with the process, put the chain on the bike. You can give it a good wipe with a cloth in case you just want to remove the excessive wax, or you can leave it for longer sustenance.
I took that to mean that wiping down the excess is not really necessary, and doing so would reduce the effectiveness of the initial application. So I left the full amount on the Shimano chain, which it would turn out is a mistake. Let's talk about the riding. The first ride for the Bossy was through my favorite Cleland Trail network, and it had been dry for a few days, but there was heaps of sort of residual water. So plenty of mud, plenty of dampness, and lots of crap spraying all over my bike. A perfect first test for the Graphenlube. When I got home, I whipped the chain off and noticed that it was quite mucky indeed. It wasn't so much dirty, it just had a ton of Graphenlube on it. So I reached out to Adam and sort of asked his thoughts, and he said, yeah, it is actually really important that you do wipe down the excess Graphenlube. This is where I circle back to the instructions from Absolute Black, and they sort of say that you don't really need to wipe it down, and if you don't wipe it down, then it'll last longer on its first application, which to me kind of sounds better. But in my testing, you really need to wipe it down. To be fair to Absolute Black, I think this is partly due to the Shimano grease just not really coming off the chain properly. I suspect that for best results, you would need to hydrosonically clean the chain to get absolutely everything off. The follow-up rides on the Bossy after I'd wiped down the chain were much better. It picked up almost no junk from the trails and from the dirt, and yeah, it wasn't anywhere near as sort of clotted up as the first time around. It really was just excessive stuff on the chain that didn't really need to be there. Having learned my lesson, I wiped down the excess off the SRAM drivetrain on the Grove. I did take care to mostly just pinch the outside of the chain to get the excess off the outer plates where you don't really need lubricant. I wanted to make sure that the rollers and everything that sort of makes contact does actually maintain a good coating of Graphenlube. I've since done a couple of rides totaling up to around 100 kilometers on the Grove, and the experience has been very good. Again, you do have a light smearing of Graphenlube across the drivetrain, but it doesn't really pick up dirt, it hasn't really picked up any of the other muck, so it does seem to be genuinely sort of repellent of water and dirt. Also, I think the fact the SRAM chain started a lot cleaner because the factory grease came off really has made a big difference with that drivetrain. Now, from an ongoing maintenance perspective, you don't have to completely re-immerse your chain every time you need to reapply. The idea is that after the first time, you can just sort of drip Graphenlube into it like it's any other lube. All you have to do is make sure that it dries properly over a couple of hours, but they do say ideally to leave it overnight. And that's pretty much standard with something like Squirt Lube, which I've used a lot of in the past. You always get best results when you let it dry properly. So did this pass my living with it test? I would say generally it's pretty easy to get going, and if it does deliver the sort of low level of ongoing maintenance and easy cleaning, then yeah, it is something that I could see investing in over time. Of course, that is a high cost of entry to get into it, and that's going to put off a lot of people. It is what it is. That's just how much this stuff costs. It's too early for me to give really robust long-term opinions, so check back in a few months once I've given it a bit more rigorous testing. And be sure to swing by Adam Kerrin's Zero Friction Cycling website, because he is going to be testing this sort of in the coming months. He's got a bit of a backlog of things to test because he is the world authority on this, and people do come to him to ask for that stuff. That is where I'm going to leave it. This was sent to me for review. It is a fully independent review and I am not paid for it. And I did in fact spend money to buy the fresh chains to make it. So, completely unbiased and independent review as always. Thank you so much for joining me. Like, subscribe, and all that sort of stuff if you found value in this content. It really means a lot to me as a small channel. Stay healthy, ride safe, and I will see you next time.